Good morning, everybody. Today we're talking about condominiums in 2025, all the forms you need to know for 2025 and beyond. My name is Sam Saad. Looking forward to speaking with you this morning. I am an attorney here in Southwest Florida. And because I'm an attorney, we're going to start off this morning with a disclaimer. I'm providing you information. It's not legal advice and it does not constitute an attorney client relationship. A little bit about me and my law firm. I've been an attorney for over 20 years. I'm the past chair and current scribe of the NABOR Legal Resources Committee, and I serve on the FARBAR Joint Drafting Committee for the FARBAR contract. My firm has been around since 2007. We help realtors, small business owners, entrepreneurs, buyers, sellers, property managers, anybody involved in real estate and business with their needs. We have a full service litigation department. We have probate. We have estate planning, as well as real estate and business law. And we have offices throughout Southwest Florida. For all your closing needs, we have a title company, Paradise Coast Title and Escrow, guaranteed to be the lowest closing fee, always up to date on the industry regulations. We have top notch security in our office, guaranteed to keep your family's information safe. You can reach out to me at any time at 239 784 5556. Today, we're going to talk about some changes from 2025 to the condominium forms. We're going to start off with the Naples Area Board of Realtors forms. And I'm going to give you a high level overview of the forms. Then we're going to dig into some of the specific changes in terms. Then we'll switch over to FARBAR and do the same thing. Just a quick look at the forms up front. So you've got your addendum to sales contract condominium. Going through it here, you can see what it looks like. This is page 1 of 3. Page 2 of 3 is here. And you can see the choices that we're going to go through and the various things. This form has not changed much since 2024, but I will point out a few of the particular changes that you're going to need to worry about. Whoops. This, of course, is the last page, page 3. And you can see here where the buyer and seller will sign it and put in the condominium information. So the biggest changes on this form are the time. So for 2025, as of July 1 of 2025, the time period to review condominium documents has gone from 3 days to 7 days, and that's 7 business days. You exclude weekends and legal holidays from your 7 day calculation. So you really could have up to 10 days for over a holiday for the buyer to review their condominium documents and terminate the contract. Remember, it's an unwaivable right of the buyer to void the contract. So you really need to make sure you get those condominium documents into the MLS and to the buyer before they sign the contract. The next section that changes a little bit is the choices that the buyer will have to review. You can see here, 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 and right here. There are 6 boxes that the seller needs to decide how they're going to answer these questions, whether or not they've had milestone inspections, whether or not it's been completed, whether they require structural integrity reserve study inspections, whether they've been completed, whether or not a turnover inspection report has been completed, and whether or is required, or whether or not it's been completed. So you've got to answer these questions. If the answer is that the association is not required to complete the milestone inspection, the structural integrity reserve study, or the turnover report, then you would check the box for not required and move on. If a report is required, then you need to make sure you determine whether it has been. And remember, under the new statute, it's 3 habitable stories above grade. So it's not just those 3 stories with its 2 stories over parking anymore. Now it's 3 habitable stories over grade. You have to do these reports or make sure that they've been done. The next part is you've got here to make sure that you select only one box if, see this big if, underlined if you've made a choice here that an inspection report is required. If an inspection report is not required, then you would skip these 2 boxes. However, if a report is required and the inspections are completed and you've given the reports to the buyer more than 7 days prior to signing the contract, you check the box here in box A. If the reports have been completed, but they were not delivered to the buyer more than 7 days prior to contracting, then you check box B here. And again, it's 7 business days to get those condo docs reviewed and the buyer can terminate. So what's really, really important with this 7 business days for condominium document review is to get your condominium document receipt signed. This is the NABOR condominium document receipt. And you can see here it has opportunity to date all of the documents that you could receive, check the box and date when they were received by the buyer, have the buyer sign and date below, and this starts the 7-day clock from running. Up next, we're going to talk about the new FARBAR condo rider. This one is 5 pages. It's been revamped for ease of use, which is very nice. I'm going to go through the pages, just give you a quick overview. You can see here what they look like. Here's page 1. Put your condominium association management company information and things in there. Then you've got page 2. Again, periodic assessments, what's due and when. Special assessments are all on page 2. Let's switch over to page 3 and 4. Here on page 3, you can see you have an opportunity to pick the delivery of additional documents, minutes, and agendas. And again, we're going to zoom in on all this. And then over here, page 4, you can see you do your milestone inspections like we just talked about in NABOR. It's a slightly different format, and we're going to go through that. And you make your choices for which inspection period for the documents. And then page 5 is pretty much just your multi-parcel building disclosure. So let's zoom in on all these sections and go through these. Up front, right at the top, you've got to put in your association information and your management company information. Contact person, phone, email, and the website address of the association. Why is that so important? It's very important now because as of December 31st, 2025, all associations with more than 25 condominiums are going to be required to put their association information, their documents that you so desperately need, on a website that'll be accessible to the seller, the owner of the property, who can then download those documents and provide them to you, the realtor, so you can get them to the buyer. Up next, the section on association approval. Whether or not the association approves the sale or not. Typically, they are approved. If they're approved, then the contract is contingent upon approval so many days before the closing date. I personally would take this 5 down to a 1 so that you could get approval on the closing date and your buyer would still be able to terminate if they didn't get it, but you would have 4 more days to get that approval. So I would take this down to a 1 here in the first blank. This next blank, very, very important blank. The seller must initiate the approval process. You can see here the seller within so many days, 5 days after the effective date, seller shall initiate the approval process with the condominium association. So don't skip that. Make sure the seller gets the application packet and gives it to the buyer so that the association approval process has been initiated. Up next, the condominium right of first refusal. If the condominium has or does not have a right of first refusal, you check these boxes here. If the members of the association have a right of first refusal, then you check the box here. If either of the member or the association have a right of first refusal, then the buyer and seller need to deliver the documents required for association right of first refusal within so many days after the effective date, 5 if left blank. So that means the seller's got to get the offer, now contract, to the association within 5 days so they can initiate the approval process and the application process. If, of course, the association or the membership do exercise their right of first refusal, then the buyer can terminate. So you'll notice here that this is about the association assessments here in paragraph 3, and the seller represents. That means that they warrant that the current condominium association is, and you put the amount here and the period here, whatever it is. But notice it's a representation by the seller, which means it better not be wrong or the buyer's going to have an opportunity to get out of this contract. Very, very important that you get these numbers accurate. Also note that there's only 2 blanks here where there used to be 4 or 5. Why is that? Because you only put the periodic assessment for the association that is the subject of this addendum. What does that mean? If there's more than one association, you need more than one condominium rider addendum for your FARBAR contract. So be very careful about that and make sure you fill out one for each one. You may have 2 condominium associations covering your property. You may have 3. You may have a condominium association and a homeowners association, in which case you would need 2 different riders. So be very careful, know your properties, and always call me if you have any questions about the forms. The association is going to be made whole by any open violations and rules and regulations, or any fines are going to be paid by the seller. So the seller is going to make sure all fines are paid and that they're not in violation of any association covenants prior to closing. Special assessments, this entire section was completely rewritten. The condominium association may have special assessments that are levied before the effective date, that is, as of the effective date. You have to decide who's going to pay those, buyer, seller, in full. They'll be paid in full prior to closing. If the condominium association levies any special assessments after the effective date, but prior to the closing date, then you have to determine who's going to pay those, buyer or seller, and you pay all those before closing. If there are any special assessments that may be paid in installments and the association will allow the buyer to assume the installments, then you have to decide who's going to pay the ones due after closing, the buyer or the seller. If the buyer pays them, the buyer picks up the fee schedule and continues the payments. If the seller pays them, or if the condominium does not allow assumption of the assessments, then the seller pays them in full at closing. You have to list all of the potential special assessments on the contract. If you don't list the potential special assessments on the contract, anything that the buyer was aware of in the preceding 12 months, then you've got yourself a major problem. In that the seller will be in default in breach of contract, and the buyer could get away and get their deposit back. You also have to disclose litigation if you're a seller. The seller represents, again, that the seller is not aware of pending litigation except, and then you list any lawsuits in these blanks here. So be very careful to be accurate and list your association assessments properly and your litigation properly. Up next, let's talk about your disclosures. Very similar to the NABOR disclosure. It's exactly the same, actually, because it's statutory. If the association or if the buyer has been provided copies of the association documents more than 7 days prior to executing the contract, then there is no 7-day right to terminate. If the buyer was provided the documents within 7 days of the contract, then the seller has 7 business days, that's excluding weekends and legal holidays, for the buyer to review the condominium documents and terminate the contract if they don't like what they see. In the FARBAR contract, the buyer may also request at the seller's expense additional documentation, including minutes of the association board meeting for the previous 12 months, agendas for the board meeting for the previous 12 months, member meeting minutes for the previous 12 months, member meeting agendas for the previous 12 months, insurance declarations for the association, and if you check the boxes above and you actually receive by the seller actually receives the inspector prepared summary, the turnover report, or the structural integrity reserve study prior to closing, then those can be turned over as well. And then other documents that the buyer may request. Notice here that if the documents are requested, the buyer has 7 days to review and terminate. Make sure you list your common elements and your parking on your contract so the buyer knows what parking space they're getting. In this box here, don't put the number of spaces available, put the designation of the space that the buyer is getting. So space 2B, for example, or 3A, whatever it is. So this is an admonition that the seller is not responsible to do repairs on common elements and limited common elements. If they are part of the association, it's the association's responsibility to fix those. Then the seller is not obligated to make repairs for common elements and limited common elements of the condominium. Up next, you have to make a request to get your structural integrity reserve study report. And again, it's very similar to NABOR, except the formatting is different. The first checkbox is for when the seller is required to and has completed the milestone inspection report. The next box is if they're not required to have completed the report. And then, of course, if they're required to have the report but would have not yet completed it, you would check box 3. So again, has the report and is not required to have the report, is required to have the report, but does not yet have it yet. Then you have your same choices for the turnover. You have it and it's done. You are not required to have a turnover report, or you're required of the turnover report, but it's not done. Check the appropriate box if you're the seller. Lastly, here on this section, is the structural integrity reserve study is the same choices. Either you're required to have it and it's done, it's not required, or it's required but not done. Check the appropriate box. Note with structural integrity reserve studies that the statutory reference is wrong. It's not 26, it's 28, but there's nothing we can do about that because the legislature made a mistake in the statute. Up next, if the milestone inspection report, the turnover report, or the structural integrity reserve study is required and it was turned over more than 7 days prior to contracting, you check this box and then there is no right to rescind the contract. However, if you have not turned over the inspection reports, the milestone inspection report, the structural integrity reserve study, or the turnover report within more than 7 days prior to contracting, then again, more than 7 days, then the buyer gets 7 days. You check the box under paragraph 2, and the buyer gets 7 days to review those documents. Lastly, you have your multi-parcel building disclosure. If you're in one of those condominiums where it's commercial on the first floor, maybe some offices, or hotel in the building, then you would have this disclosure provided. There's nothing for you to do here. Just give the paper to the buyer. So again, the FARBAR forms don't have a comprehensive list of documents that you'll provide, but they do have this very handy condominium document receipt form where you would check off the condominium documents were delivered to the buyer. You put the name of the condominium, the date received, the condominium governance form. The cooperative documents are also able to be disclosed on this document. The structural integrity reserve study, the milestone inspection report, and then the buyer signs and dates, and you give this back to the seller. I want to thank everybody for your time and attention today. If you have any questions, please feel free to email or text me at any time. I look forward to working with you all in the future. Thank you very much.